intrigued by your mind. I'm intrigued by your looks. I'm intrigued and beguiled. I gone and read all your books.
Hi, my name is Catherine Brodsky, and I would like to welcome you to a new episode of Mind the Future. On this show, I talk to really interesting people from the worlds of art, technology, science, and I ask them to predict the future of what they love and do. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider this your official invitation to do so. And if you would like to be kept up to date about future episodes, make sure you hit the notification bell. And if you want to make me feel good about myself for a change, hit the like button when possible. Unless you really hate the episode, then don't tell me. Do you hear that? Well, that's interesting, because my guest today is Dutch conductor Otto Tausk, who also happens to be on his second season as music director of the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra. Previously, Tausk was music director of the Opera Theatre and Tonhalle St. Gull Orchestra in Switzerland. He has appeared as a guest with such orchestras as Rotterdam Philharmonic, Danish National Symphony Orchestra, Los Angeles Philharmonic, Melbourne Symphony, as well as BBC Scottish Symphony and BBC National Orchestra of Wales. If you'd like to find out more about Otto, visit his website, ottotausk.com. And now for a feature presentation. Hi, welcome to the Mind the Future. And today together we're going to be reimagining the future of music and classical or orchestral music in particular. So are you ready to do this?
We're ready.
Okay, great. So classical music, it's unique in that we do live performances of compositions from hundreds of years ago. And by the way, when I say we, I don't do it, you do it. But how has classical music and how it's performed evolved over time?
So classical music, I think it started off just being music. I think the idea of classical music is something we've invented along the way. I think music just came from people singing, the tradition of telling stories. But if you want to remember a story, it's better if you sing it, because then you don't forget it. So if music was a way of communication, I think that has always been the case and still is. So and music then somehow evolved to something that was brought to people in a concert hall. And the element of telling a story maybe lost its meaning because the story isn't let's say isn't the thing that is really communicated. It became more about music, although music of course still tells a story. But it's not the idea of bringing the news across the world or repeating your history of a family or a village or something. So music became something as an art form, and music. I think we should look at music as not just classical or pop music or whatever kind. I think all music is the same. There's a difference, of course, between good and bad music, but the idea that classical music should be apart from the rest of the other kind of music, that's a strange concept somehow, and I don't really believe in that. So how did it become the way we listen nowadays? That's actually not an easy question, because somehow music became an elite art form, I think, which is a pity, because I always feel that music, I think we all love music, and only a few people have access to it, or are or have experienced music in a way that it stays with you somehow. And especially the music we make with a symphony orchestra is something that not everyone actually knows and has experienced. But I think as soon as someone listens to music, especially when you're young and you hear music for the first time, it can really touch you in a way that you want to hear more, and you want music to be part of your life. So I always feel that it's extremely important to reach out to people that have no idea what we're actually doing. And I'm always convinced that if the musicians on stage make great music and believe in what they're doing, you will win the heart and the minds of the people listening.
It's interesting because you are taking compositions that were written possibly hundreds of years ago, and are you you're probably not performing them in the exact same way as when they initially were performed.
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think there are two really interesting elements you were talking about. One of them is that we're performing a lot of music that has been written hundreds of years ago. That's true, but I always try to program music that is also written now, because I think music that is written now has a very can be a very powerful way of speaking about the world we live in. I always feel that music reflects our world, but also influences our world. And it goes both ways. I think our society influences the art we make, but also art influences the world we live in. And I think music is actually a big part of that. Now, that means we have to play music written by composers that are living composers. And of course, we don't know if that music will stay for another 100, 200, 500 years, like the music of Beethoven or Mozart. But I think to decide that before you've actually tried it is not a great idea. I think we should give it a try and see how it works out. I think it's also up to the audience to decide whether they like the music or not. It's my job as a musician, as a conductor with the orchestra, but also as a programmer. It's my job to be the advocate for new music. Now, when you're talking about performance practice of the music written a couple of hundred years ago, I think in the past 50, 60 years, a lot of research has been done. And for instance, we managed to kind of reconstruct the instruments of the orchestra of 100, 200, 300 years ago. So if you hear those instruments that were used at the time, you get a very clear sense of how the music must have sounded and what the orchestra sounded like in the mind of the composer. So Beethoven wrote for a certain size of orchestra, which was usually much smaller than we're used to today, although in the COVID time we're living in now, orchestras are very small. So we're actually going a little bit back again in time. But of course, the concert halls at the time were much smaller than the concert halls we know now. So for instance, in Vancouver, we have this huge Orpheum where 2,700 people can sit in the audience. Now this is so much bigger than a lot of the halls were at the time. Many of the pieces were written that we actually play. So you can then decide to use the same size of orchestra as a Mozart or Haydn or a Beethoven did, and play with that smaller size in that huge hall, but it will never have the same impact as as if you would actually have that size of an ensemble in a smaller hall. So we have all these choices to make all the time. Now, I think it's really important to go back to the intention of the composer. One of the great advantages of doing contemporary music is that you can actually ask the composer, was this what you had in mind when you wrote the music? Is this what you wanted to hear? Or should we perform it in a totally different way? What is the meaning behind the notes? Are we expressing what you are trying to say? Now, that's a great advantage of working with composers. You can just ask them. Although very often you get an answer that's also confusing, because composers very often write music maybe not always in a very deliberate or conscious way. It's also a process that happens in a kind of well, I don't want to call it mysterious way, but it's some very often really good pieces are written in a way that the composer is of course writing the notes, but the composer very often is not aware of where the notes are coming from. So there is if you ask composers for some kind of explanation behind a reason or purpose or a goal behind the notes, you don't always get a very clear and helpful answer. So it's also relative how much help it actually is to ask a composer about the idea behind the notes. But I do believe we have to try and figure out why pieces were written and who they were written for, and what the sound world, the ideal sound world of a composer was. Now, if we then actually try to copy that in the end or not, that's another question. But knowing where it comes from always helps me a great deal of, gives me a great deal of information. And even knowing that information makes a performance different. And that's something I actually experience quite a lot. Is if you come back to works you've done before, let's say a symphony that I really love, and I do it maybe every year once with an orchestra somewhere in the world, I find that every next time I do that, the result is very different. And it has to do with me knowing the piece maybe in a different way, but also all the other concerts I've been doing in between, which then actually changes the way I think about a piece, and it changes the way I look at the score. I always try to start off with a new, fresh score. So just I always write in a lot. My scores are filled with colored and penciled markings, to the big frustration of the librarians, because they have the material and I ruin the material completely. And then
stickman too.
Yeah, and then when we revisit that music, I want a new, fresh score, so I can start all over again with looking at the notes and coming up with new ideas. And that's a way for me that it stays alive.
Right. Well, what do you see as the future of music? Do you think it's something that's going to stay as being something that's performed in musical halls with limited seats and great acoustics? Or, do you see it kind of evolving into something else? Of course, the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra recently launched the concert hall. So, that is a kind of an evolution of.
Absolutely. It's a big change. It's a huge change. I really believe in live music. I believe in let's say, vibrations through the air that go from one person to another person. Experiencing live music in a concert hall where you feel the musicians are making sounds with their instruments, and hearing that live and feeling that live. I don't think there's anything that can replace that sensation. On the other hand, there are a lot of benefits with all technical solutions we have nowadays. We can record music and we can have it sent out across the world. One of the big advantages I find that, for instance, my kids who live in the Netherlands can now actually experience the concert. Sorry, that's the phone going.
Nice.
They can actually, my kids can actually listen to concerts I give in Vancouver from the Netherlands. So that's a huge advantage for me personally. They can see what I'm actually doing. And I think the world we are now living in just makes it impossible to have full audiences attend live concerts. We're facing that reality right now. And I'm very proud of the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra to take the big step of going digital, because it's something that we have to learn to do. It's a big change for us, but it offers a lot of new ways of talking about the music. For instance, if you see an orchestra play on your computer screen, you can come really close to the musicians. You can see the hands. You can you can almost feel more personally connected to the musicians, because you can get so close. You can also talk about the music you're playing. You can give background information. You could even have a live chat during the concert where someone can talk about, and this is happening now in the music, and listen to that piccolo solo, it's coming up right now. So there are many possibilities that we didn't have just playing live in a concert hall. So I think when we go back to the stage, when we go back to, let's say, the normal concert situation, I don't think what we're learning now will be lost. I think we're learning something new that we will also keep doing.
Right.
And I think in the end, it's a kind of a bonus thing we will then have. I do believe going back to live concerts is definitely going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. I was thinking about, I went to an Elton John concert and I was given this device that allows me to sort of make my own mix live as I'm listening to the concert. And so I can bring up certain instruments or bring up the vocals or whatever. So I was thinking about, applying that where you have the concert hall, and maybe the audience, when they're at home, they can mix their own recordings and bring up a violin or bring up the flute or the clarinet section. So I'm wondering, how do you feel about these choices becoming sort of dynamic in the hands of the audience and the listener as opposed to the conductor?
That's actually a really interesting idea. I haven't thought about that before yet. But I think it's really interesting because I can well imagine that for getting to know a piece really well, and if you can read a score and you want to highlight certain instruments, for instance, this is a really fantastic possibility. I haven't thought about that yet. It's a great idea, actually. I wouldn't want performances to be, let's say, taken apart and being put together again in a different way. Because I think it might be, you will then actually start changing the composition, which I really believe that the way a piece is written, we should do our very best to make it sound that way. I don't think we should change the work, but that's actually a fascinating idea.
Actually, we can talk about it.
Yeah, but the thing is, I had an idea yesterday that came up because of the fact that we need to be socially distanced on stage. We cannot fit as much as musicians as we would like on stage, which has a couple of benefits as well. One of the benefits is that the repertoire that we usually play changes, and we start looking for new repertoire written for smaller ensembles, which is very exciting, because you end up with works that you otherwise would have never programmed, which is great. So to give you an example, there's the incredible Rite of Spring by Stravinsky, which is written for a huge orchestra. And it's a very powerful and strong piece. I think it's one of the best pieces of the last century. And we were planning on playing that. Now, because of the social distancing, we can't put all those musicians on stage. So what do? We look for other works by Stravinsky that we might not have thought of before. And you come up with, he has written a huge amount of works for smaller ensemble that are equally strong and powerful, but in a very different way. So that's a huge benefit. Now, we were also thinking, but we are a symphony orchestra. We're not just a small chamber orchestra. So we don't want to lose that. We don't want to lose being a symphony orchestra. So one of the ideas that came up was, why don't we play one of those really big pieces, but we record it in segments. So let's do the woodwinds first, and then we record the strings, and then we do the brass, and then the percussion, and then we put that together. Because this is all possible in our digital world. And that way, of course, it's very different from playing the piece in its original form from the beginning to the end, but it also gives you a chance as a listener, if you're kind of part of that process, to get to know the piece in an extremely detailed and a beautiful way. So if you think about I was thinking about the Concerto for Orchestra by Bartók, for instance, or let's take the Rite of Spring by Stravinsky. And if you isolate the percussion part of the Rite of Spring, and you play that with the percussion section, and you have that as an element, I think it could be really fascinating for the audience to just hear the percussion part of the Rite of Spring, and then you hear the percussion part together with the brass, and then together with the strings, and then with the entire orchestra, just as an example. And I think building a piece like that is something musicians are used to, because that's very often the way you rehearse with an orchestra. You take it apart, you build from small to the big piece. But the audience in a concert only hears the final product, which is the entire piece. So I think being part of that process of putting a piece like that together, that's actually could be a really fascinating thing to do.
Yeah. I was trying to envision like really futuristic ways of performances, and I was thinking, well, could we have 3D performances at home, or how about augmented reality performances where you go to the park and you wear these glasses or contact lenses and you see an overlay of the symphony, and
Yes,
you're able to enjoy a performance, and you have your headphones on, so you don't bother anyone, but you can still experience it. Do you think we're going
exactly.
to have these kinds of experiences? What do you think of them?
And I don't know, it could be really interesting. I was also thinking it might be nice to have a camera on my head, and then the audience can experience what it is to be a conductor, to have all those musicians in front of you. And you can come up with all of these digital fun things to do. I mean, you can also imagine you have an orchestra, and as an audience member, you actually are the conductor, so you can actually influence the speed of the music, or the balance, or the sound, or the timing, or so there. I think there are many fun things to do, but we'll probably always go back to, yes, hearing a concert live. Nothing beats hearing a concert live.
Right. Well, there's been some attempts at non-traditional ways of creating music. So like artificial intelligence. Do you think humans can never be replaced, or can virtual reality performance where, because in Japan, they already have these like characters, and they've been getting these agents and big deals, and they go to concerts, and there's a completely fake character, 3D kind of projection performing, and the music was written by an AI. What do you think of that?
I've never heard great music not written by a real person, so I'm not convinced this is a way forward. I think it's an interesting experiment to see what we can achieve. I think the power of music is very much in the personality of the composer, and in the heart of the music. I mean, probably you can come up with a lot of ways of write a symphony in the style of Mozart, and probably you would get very close to it, but it would never feel like a symphony of Mozart. I don't think you would ever have this, and it's very difficult to explain what that actually is. Probably it's not so hard to come up with a computer program that can write incredibly complicated fugues in the style of Bach, but actually hearing a Bach fugue is a different thing.
Yeah, and I mean,
what is that? I don't know. I don't know what that is. I think that's a really interesting question. So the experiment is interesting, but it will never replace the music written by real people.
Right. Well, and ultimately that AI is learning from real people. It's learning from Bach. It's not creating it from nowhere, which, these musicians were obviously inspired by others that they've heard, but at the same time, there's some divine intervention, or whatever you can call it, that, they have the sound in their head, and they share it with us, luckily. Yes. Where right now, I feel like music venues haven't changed that much in quite a long time. I think they're quite old institutions. And if you were to kind of reimagine what a music venue would look like, say 50 years from now, with technology going the way that it is,
wow,
what do you think it would look like?
Wow, well, that's an interesting question. What I would love to see is that the connection between the musicians and the audience is somehow more direct and more personal. I don't know how we can achieve that in a concert hall, and maybe here the technology can help us it would be great if the interaction becomes even more more intense. But I have to think about that. Actually, it's a difficult question to answer. But it's an interesting one, because you're right. The concert halls are in a way very old-fashioned.
I mean, there is something appealing about the fact that it's old-fashioned. Like, I went to, I forget the name of it, but in Vienna, for example, their famous concert hall, and knowing that that's been there for all these centuries, and,
yes,
and the history of it, and why it was built, and just how beautiful it is, and how it sort of connects us with our past. I mean, I find that architecture is very much the same way, especially if you go to Europe, right? You feel connected with the past in a way that you don't really feel in a modern city.
That's very true.
But in some ways, we could look at changing things up a little bit. But maybe it'll stay the same. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it will, because we want that historical tie, because we crave that nostalgia and that experience of like timelessness that happens in an orchestra hall.
Well, it's an interesting thing to realize that some of the best acoustics are very old buildings, and not necessarily the new concert halls. They don't all sound fantastic because they're new. Some of the old ones sound really great. And have a certain warmth or a certain color in the sound. What I find very often is that new concert halls are very clear in their sound, are very articulate, and you can hear a lot of details. If you compare that to the older concert halls, the older concert halls might not be so transparent in the sound, but some have a really beautiful color, a beautiful warmth, which I think is also really important. So, I always find myself torn between the two in a way, because I really like it when you can hear everything. I really enjoy having a very transparent soundscape. If I see a score, ideally, if I would follow one of the lines in the score, I want to be able to hear it. And if in a concert hall I can't hear a certain line that is in the score, that means either the notes in the score are you actually don't need them, or there's something in the acoustics that makes it impossible to hear everything. So I'm always looking for that transparency in sound, but at the same time having just a very transparent or dry kind of clinical soundscape is not very let's say, I really enjoy it when the sound also has color and warmth. Mm-hmm. So I always find myself torn between the two, and it's also, I think, maybe a bad habit of conductors, that they want to control everything all the time. They want to control the tempo, they want to control the balance, they want to control the direction of where the music is going. And I think it's very healthy to realize that you cannot control everything, and that things are, I don't know the English word for that, but it's they happen. It's created in the moment.
Yeah, and that's the magic of it, right?
And that's the magic of it as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting how different spaces do have such a unique sound of their own. And like I remember the Grand Opry, for example, it's kind of famous for if you stand in a specific spot
Yes.
without a microphone, you know, you get
Yes.
incredible
Yes.
sound.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah,
the acoustical thing is an interesting question, because very often also what you hear as a conductor is very different from what you hear as in the audience. Now, if we now look at um, the digital performances, you're very much more in control as a musician of what the audience actually hears, because you record something and you can change it just the way you like it, and you can actually take the acoustics of the Wiener Musikverein in Vienna you were talking about, take that acoustic and, for instance, make a recording here in Vancouver, but use the acoustics of the Vienna concert hall, and then it sounds like you're in Vienna. So,
right.
yeah,
That's interesting.
but I think it's still a very different thing whether you're actually sitting in the Vienna concert hall than in the Orpheum in Vancouver.
It is. It absolutely is. But I will say that, and I'm thinking about it, like there are certain sounds, like maybe a song that I heard in a particular moment. Like there's a song that I remember listening to on a train on my, you know, on the train from Vienna or to Vienna, and these sounds kind of associate me in
Yes.
the city, or like a performance that happened you know, in a park or something. It takes me back to that, even though the song doesn't belong to that park, or it doesn't belong to the train.
Yes.
It brings that back as a stream. It seems like a lot of the music that we create today is shaped by music, of course, that we've created in the past, but also the technologies that we currently have. I mean, in the past, you know, certain instruments didn't exist, now they do. Now we have, you know, computers, new instruments. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Well, I think it's all it helps us to create new art and new music, and it doesn't it just gives us so much more to work with and to explore. This is also something I always enjoy when art forms join. So having visual art in combination with music. If you do it in a creative and in a good way, it becomes more interesting. It becomes it can have more impact or a different impact, and it shouldn't get in the way of each other. I think the sounds we can create. I believe there's so much to discover still. I don't think we're there. I don't think we know all the sounds we can hear. I think we will learn so many different nuances still to come for us. But I am in a way also very attached or let's say connected to the instruments that we know. It's also I played the violin for a long time, and I had an old violin from 1752, an old French violin, and I had a new one made in Hungary, and they were both great instruments. But the old one had all this, let's say, life experience in the sound, yeah, and the new violin was there to be discovered and to change and to grow, and was, let's say, I had no idea where it would go. The sound could change in various directions. Whereas the older instruments somehow had a personality that I kind of knew and loved very much. So I think if you look at instruments that way, I think that's also true for halls, and that's also true for sound.
You know, as you were talking about marrying sort of the visual with sound, I was imagining like a ginormous tent with lasers, and there would be, and everybody lays down like, you know, on the ground while the orchestra plays, and then these images come down. So like, because in Japan, in Tokyo, I went to something like that where it was these roses, and there were like 3D sort of roses falling down and petals.
Right.
It was one of the most memorable things, and if I had an orchestra there, it would have been even more amazing. So I'm just,
that's a beautiful idea. Yeah,
you should do that.
Yeah.
That would be
we
wonderful.
should do that.
Yeah, I was
Yes.
like, I know in my head I'm already producing it. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna reach out to the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, and
That's a good idea.
It would actually be brilliant. It could even be a collaboration with the Japanese.
Yes.
They're a group of artists, and they do these really beautiful experiential kind of art exhibits, but they're very, you know, often you can touch things. They had something where it was water, and you walk in water, and they project all these fish, and when the fish touch you, they turn into flowers. So it was just they're very, very interesting, very immersive. And take that and add, you know, music to it, I think. I mean, they had music playing, but it wasn't a live orchestra, and I think it would sound phenomenal.
Right.
A live orchestra. You know, audiences for specifically classical music, they do tend to skew a bit older and, you know, a little bit more affluent, which is probably why they skew older. In what ways do you think it needs to evolve to draw in that like younger audience in order to sort of thrive and survive and carry on through time? You know, I know the Vancouver Orchestra Symphony, for example, would do things like Harry Potter concerts, which people love. I think people like sort of instrumental music already without even realizing it, because they movies. Yeah,
I think that's a way into to get people interested in music, definitely. And I think a lot of people love music without actually being aware that they do. I think one of the key things is that that listening to music is very much also connected to making music. It would be great if we find a way to not look at music as in a very passive way. It's just this, okay, you play and I listen, and I like it or I don't like it. That's a very one-dimensional way of looking at music. I think if you realize, or if you if people make music, it's a very special way of connecting, and having kids play an instrument and make music in a group, in an orchestra or in a band or whatever. I think that's the key to making sure that music survives. I think just by playing music and hoping you will have interested audiences in the future. I think that's too passive a way to look at music. So the key is to have young people play an instrument or sing or be actively engaged in music, because music, as I said, connects people, but it makes sure that you are physically and emotionally and intellectually and socially, it all comes together in a way. So it's a very it's a beautiful way of connecting yourself with music and with other people as well. And I think that's the key to the survival of music. I'm not so afraid. I know a lot of people talk about the audience is getting older and where are the young people. I think that has always been the case. I don't think 50 years ago the audiences were much younger than they are today, or 100 years ago, or maybe 200 years ago. I think it is just a pattern in life that when you get a bit older, you make different choices and you do different things in your life. And maybe that's when you go to concerts and that's when you listen to music, and that's fine. That's not. But I do think if we don't invest in making music, in singing, I think in school kids should sing every day, even though if they cannot sing or they cannot read music, or that's not important. I think if they sing every day, like they brush their teeth or eat an apple or have to learn maths, if they sing, they connect with sound and, well, all the things I talked about. And there's the key for music to stay.
What an interesting idea, because I'm thinking when I was a child and whenever I felt terrible, I would just kind of go off on my own and let out some sounds called singing. And I felt
exactly.
Yeah, it's a way to kind of let out.
Exactly, and it's exactly, and that's also what I remember. Being by myself, I always kind of started to make up songs with stories in it, and because you sing them, it's much easier to let that flow and let that go. Anyway, that was for me, and I'm a terrible singer. I cannot sing at all. I'm a terrible singer, but that doesn't matter. It's because it comes from the inside, and so I feel that it's kind of it's great if you can feel the freedom to improvise, and I think that's a great start for making music.
I agree, and it does give you this interesting freedom. I mean, not just musically, but when you improvise, it just says it's okay to just be in the moment,
exactly,
and not judge it. So it's got
exactly.
Yeah, there's like in acting, there's a breathing exercise, for example, where you just kind of you take a breath in and you're just breathing in and out, and then you kind of let out a sound, whatever comes
yes.
out. So the position it has, so it's the most natural sound. And even that experience of letting out that sound can be really profound, because it allows you to connect how you're feeling with an expression of some sort of it. And so you're connected to your feelings in a way that maybe you weren't up to.
Yes.
That's kind of, to me, that it's very similar. And
yeah.
It's meditative.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So I have my last question for you for now. And that is, what is your greatest hope for music in the future, or the future of music?
My greatest hope would be that everyone, there's a dog now, even the dogs, even the dogs have sounds. No, well, my greatest hope, of course, would be that music stays a big part of our lives and a big part of the world we live in, because I think music can be something that nothing else can. I think music has the power to connect yourself within and also between people more than anything else. And very often I believe that's very helpful for the world and for the future of the world. Also, if you think about, we've been talking about music as a way of expression and of the freedom to make up your own song, or the freedom to improvise your own music. Music is also, it's not only something you actively do, it's also the listening that is so important. So I think music teaches us to listen, and this is something I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but we all learn how to speak, but we don't really learn how to listen. And music can help you to learn to listen. And I think the future of the world is in good hands with people that know how to listen. And having music as a way of learning that is so valuable.
I love that.
Maybe that's a wish for the future.
So that people can learn to listen better.
Exactly.
Great. I love that. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It was
Thanks.
wonderful seeing you.
Yes, thank you.